There is a sound a phone makes when a call ends on the other end. Not when you hang up. When they hang up. It is a different silence. Smaller somehow. More complete. Derek made that sound at 11:34 in the morning on April 17th, and I stood in my kitchen holding the phone and listening to it for a moment before I set it down next to the coffee pot and picked up my mail. I want you to understand what had just happened. Not the call, what happened before the call. What my brother had spent 6 weeks setting in motion and 8 days waiting to land on him. That's what I want to tell you. Let me back up. Welcome to Real Life Verdict. Get comfortable. The people in the story had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment, hit that like button, and make sure you're subscribed. My name is Norman. I am 64 years old. I spent 38 years as a union carpenter, most of that time running small commercial renovation crews, and I retired 3 years ago when a shoulder injury made overhead work impossible. I own my house outright. 4 miles from where I grew up, my wife Linda died 6 years ago, ovarian cancer, and the second bedroom has a guest bed in it that my mother uses 3 or 4 nights a week, which has been the arrangement for about a year now. I drive her to appointments. I make sure she takes her medication. She is 89 and she is mobile, and she still asks about her neighbors by name. But she gets confused in the evening sometimes, and she shouldn't be alone when that happens. She is not a burden. I want to say that clearly, and only once. She is not a burden. I want to say that clearly and only once. She is not a burden. In my garage there is a Craftsman table saw from 1987 that I have rebuilt twice. I still use it. Thursday mornings I teach carpentry and tool maintenance at the County Veterans Workshop. Guys coming out of rehab programs or transitioning from VA services. I am not telling you these things to make myself sound like anything. I am telling you because you need to know who was sitting across from Derek when he decided to call a vote. Derek is my youngest brother. He is 12 years younger than me, which means I was already out of the house and working by the time he was old enough to cause trouble, and he caused plenty of it. He works in pharmaceutical sales now, drives a nice car, lives in a new construction subdivision with his second wife and her teenage daughter. He is quick with a joke, and he remembers your birthday, and he looks you in the eye when he wants something from you. I trusted him the way you trust someone you've known your entire life, not because he earned it day by day, because he was my brother. That is its own kind of trust. Different from the kind you build. Harder to revoke. At family dinners, Derek is the one who refills everyone's glass without being asked. He is the one who tells the story about Dad's machine shop and gets the punchline right every time. He checks his phone during conversations longer than 3 minutes. He tilts it slightly away, not enough that you'd call him on it. Just enough. But everyone has their tells. I never thought much about it. The one thing I noticed in the months before April was that Derek had started asking questions about the trust. Small questions. Casual. Slipped into conversations about other things. How does the property management work? Do the distributions process automatically? Is there much involved in administering it? I answered the questions. They seemed like the kind of questions a person asks when they're getting older and starting to think about these things. I filed them away without attaching any meaning to them. I should have looked at what he was filing. April 9th was a Tuesday. I know that because Tuesday is when I do the grocery run, and I had 2 bags on the counter when Pauline called me that afternoon to say Derek had asked everyone to come over that evening to talk about Mom. I went. Of course I went. She's my mother. Pauline's kitchen table seat 6. Derek was on one side with his hands flat on the table in front of him, the way he sits when he's already made a decision about something. Kevin was next to him. Kevin, who has a photograph of our father on his desk at the insurance office, but hasn't come to a family holiday in 4 years. Pauline was clearing the coffee cup she'd already put out, twisting that silver bracelet our mother gave her, the one she wears every single day. Derek had printed something out. Facility costs, comparison tables, something he'd gotten from a website. He pushed it across the table to me. He talked for about 10 minutes. Care needs were increasing. The current arrangement wasn't sustainable. There were good facilities nearby, he said, clean places with staff. The trust could cover the cost, and that would be the responsible thing to do. All things considered. He said all things considered, 3 times. I asked if anyone had visited Mom in the past 2 weeks. Nobody answered. Pauline stopped clearing cups. I asked if anyone had offered to take a shift, a few nights a week, a weekend, anything. Kevin said, I don't like it either, but the numbers are the numbers. Pauline said, we all have to be realistic about what we can handle, Norman. I looked at each of them. Then I looked at Derek. He said, we took a vote, Norman. You're outnumbered. I did not raise my voice. I did not push the paper back across the table. I did not say the 7 things that came to mind in that moment. I picked up my keys. I want you to understand something about me. I spent 38 years on job sites with men who settled things by getting louder. I watched it every day. I learned early that a man who stays quiet when everyone expects him to react is a man who still has the advantage. I wasn't being measured. I wasn't performing patience. I just knew. The same way I know when a board isn't square, that the conversation was over and the real work hadn't started yet. I drove home. The grocery bags were still on the counter. I put the cold things away and left the rest. I had one thing to check. The next morning I was in the garage by 7, running a piece of oak through the table saw, parts for a bookshelf a neighbor had asked me to fix. My phone rang twice. Both calls from Pauline. I let it ring. I wasn't avoiding her because I was angry. I was letting the silence be information. She would tell Derek I wasn't answering. Derek would assume I was upset. An upset man, he would think, is a man who might eventually be managed. He had not yet understood what kind of man he was dealing with. April 11th, 1:30 in the afternoon. Martin Schaefer's office. Martin is 71. He has a leather-bound daily planner he's carried since the 1980s, writes everything in the same blue fountain pen. He has known my family since I was in high school. He drafted the trust 14 years ago when my father was getting his affairs in order, after the machine shop sold, after the duplexes were paid off, when my father sat down and thought carefully about what would happen to what he'd built. Martin had the original trust document open on his desk, not a photocopy. The original. He walked me through Section 7, subsection C. I asked him one question. Is there any requirement to disperse annually? He read the language again, though I don't think he needed to. He said, it says, may disperse, Norman. Not shall. I nodded. I thanked him. I told him I'd be in touch. I drove home and I sat in my kitchen the next morning with coffee and looked at the photograph on my refrigerator. My mother and father in front of the machine shop in 1989. My father has his arm around her shoulders. He is not looking at the camera. He's looking at her. My father watched Derek burn through the early inheritance he gave him in his 20s. He watched it happen and he did not say much about it. But 14 years ago, when he sat down with Martin to structure what he was leaving behind, he wrote the trust the way he wrote it for a reason. He thought about who his children were. He thought about what they might do. And he made a decision. I understood his decision on the morning of April 12th. That was when I made mine. I had one thing that Derek had not accounted for. I knew he hadn't accounted for it because he had never once asked me what the trust document actually said. He assumed the trustee role was clerical, a formality, the kind of thing you give the oldest kid out of tradition. He did not ask because it had not occurred to him that there was anything to ask. That was his mistake. I am going to tell you what that mistake cost him. But not yet. Stay with me. April 13th, late afternoon. Ray Costello's driveway. Ray is 68. He drives a 1998 Buick LeSabre that he washes by hand every Sunday in the same driveway of the same house he has lived in for 40 years. He was wiping it down with a chamois cloth when I pulled up. He looked up, nodded, and kept wiping. I stood there with my arms folded, and I told him what happened at the meeting. He didn't interrupt. He didn't ask clarifying questions or make faces while I talked. He just listened, the way some men know how to listen, all the way through, until the thing is said. When I finished, he wrung out the chamois and draped it over the side mirror. He said, I got the spare room, and I'm home all day anyway. No conditions on that. No vote required. Ray's wife grew up 2 streets over from my mother. They've known each other for 40 years. The spare room has good light and a television on the dresser, and there is always someone home. I hadn't asked him. He said it before I could. That is the difference between Ray Costello and the three people who sat at Pauline's kitchen table with a printout of facility comparison rates. Before I go further, I need to ask you something directly. Have you ever been the one who kept the arrangement running, showed up every week, took the calls, covered the gap that nobody else wanted to look at, and then been told you were outnumbered when it was time to make a decision about the very thing you'd been holding together? If that has happened to you, I want you to drop a comment below, because what happened next is something I think you'll understand before I finish explaining it. If you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. You do not want to stop here. Let's keep going. April 14th, evening. My mother is on the couch in my living room watching a game show. She has the volume up a little higher than she used to. She asked me if everything was all right. I told her it was. She asked if Pauline was coming by this week. I told her I didn't think so. She accepted that the way she accepts most things now, not because she didn't notice, but because she has gotten to an age where she has decided not to push on things that seem already decided. She turned back to the television. I stood in the doorway for a moment. Derek, Pauline, and Kevin had never told her what they'd voted on. They hadn't said a word to her. They had sat in Pauline's kitchen and voted to move her out of the life she was living and into a facility, and they had not said one word to her about it. They were going to wait until it was arranged and presented to her as inevitable. She didn't know. She thought Pauline was just busy. I want you to stay with me here because this is where everything I thought I understood about my siblings started to come apart and get replaced with something clearer. I had spent 6 weeks wondering if I was reading the situation wrong, wondering if Derek genuinely believed this was the practical thing and couldn't see what it would cost her, wondering if Pauline was just scared and didn't know another way. I stopped wondering on April 14th. You don't protect a person from information about her own life because you are being practical. You do it because you are afraid she'll say no, and you've already decided her answer doesn't matter. That is not a family trying to solve a problem. That is 3 people trying to move quickly enough that no one can stop them. I was the only one who could stop them. I called Martin on April 15th and told him to prepare the letters. He asked if I was sure, not to challenge me. Martin does not challenge me. Martin does not challenge. He asks because he is careful, and careful is exactly what you want in an attorney. I told him I was sure. He said, "Your father knew exactly what he was doing when he wrote it this way." The letters would go out April 17th. The same day the annual distribution was scheduled to process. Here is what I need you to understand, and this is the part I have been holding back since the beginning of this story. Derek believed the vote at Pauline's kitchen table was the mechanism. He believed a majority decision in a family meeting was the thing that controlled what happened next. He had done his research on facility costs. He had lined up Kevin, and he had leaned on Pauline. Pauline, whose husband has been out of work for 7 months, who has been borrowing against the annual distribution to cover bills, who had a reason to vote yes that had nothing to do with our mother, and everything to do with keeping Derek happy. Oh, the distribution kept coming. Derek knew the trust existed. He knew it funded everything. He did not know, had never asked, had never thought to ask, that the trust gives me, as trustee, sole signatory authority over every disbursement. Not advisory authority, sole authority. The language says I may disperse annually, not shall, may. My father put that language in the document 14 years ago. He sat with Martin Schaefer, and he wrote it that way deliberately, because he had watched Derek spend the lump sum inheritance in his 20s like it was a game. And he understood that Pauline and Kevin would follow Derek's lead when it was convenient for them to do so. He knew what his children were. He structured the trust accordingly. And then he died and left me holding the mechanism. Derek spent 6 weeks building a case for a vote that was never going to matter. The vote was theater. I was the stage. April 16th, Ray and I were in the spare room moving a bed frame into position. His wife had made up the bed with clean sheets. There was a lamp on the nightstand and good light from the window and a small television on the dresser. It looked like a room where someone was expected and welcome. My mother would move in the following week. The next morning, April 17th, 11:20 a.m. Derek called. He had gotten the letter an hour before. He was calling from his car. His voice was tight and fast, not quite shouting but working toward it. He wanted to know what I thought I was doing. He wanted to know what I thought I was doing. He wanted to know who gave me the right. He wanted to know if I understood what I was doing to this family. I let him go for about 15 seconds. Then I said, "We took a vote, Derek. You're outnumbered." The silence on his end lasted about 3 seconds. I told him the annual distributions were suspended indefinitely under my discretionary authority as trustee. I told him our mother was taken care of. I told him I would not be discussing it further. He started talking again. His voice had changed registers. Harder now, working towards something that wanted to be a threat but hadn't found its shape yet. I hung up. I set the phone down next to the coffee pot. I picked up my mail. I went through it the same way I go through it every morning. Bills, circulars, one letter from the county assessor that wasn't urgent. I stacked it. I finished my coffee. Pauline left a voicemail the next day. She was crying. She said they hadn't meant it the way it sounded. She said she thought I understood they were just trying to be practical. She asked me to call her back. I saved the voicemail. I did not call her back. The following Thursday I was at the Veterans Workshop, teaching a younger guy how to square a miter joint. He asked if I was all right. I told him I was fine. He said I seemed different. I finished the cut and handed him the saw. I am not different. I am exactly who I have always been. The difference is that now my siblings know it. That afternoon I drove to Ray's house. The spare room was ready. My mother's chair from the living room, the one she likes, with the wide armrests, was already positioned next to the window. I stood in the doorway for a moment. The lamp was on. The sheets were clean. It looked like a room where someone was going to be all right. I drove home the long way, past the street where we all grew up, past the lot where the machine shop used to be. The light was good that evening. April light, long and level, and not quite warm yet. I thought about my father standing in front of that machine shop, with his arm around my mother's shoulders, not looking at the camera, looking at her. He knew what he was doing. I parked in my driveway and sat for a moment before I went inside. The shoulder that ended my career was stiff the way it gets in the evenings. I did not mind it. Some things you carry, some things you set down. I went inside. I started dinner. The house was quiet in the way it is quiet when something that needed doing has finally been done.